So today we're going to be talking about one of my favourite games, The Last of Us. An absolutely stunning experience, with what has to be a contender for one of the best stories ever told in a video game. The depth, the emotion, the characters, the brutality, but also the beauty, all of it just absolutely stunning. And I'm going to be connecting The Last of Us to a type of philosophical thought experiment called the Trolley problem. This episode will have major spoilers for the first game and the first series of the TV series. So if you haven't played it and want to, and I absolutely recommend you do, stop listening immediately because I'm definitely going to ruin it for you. So The Last of Us is a post-apocalyptic story set in the USA, in a world beset by a deadly fungal virus called cordyceps, which burrows inside people's brains, takes complete control of them, and turns them first into zombie-like creatures, then slowly turns them into more deadly, grotesque fungus monsters. Civilization has completely crumbled, as more people get bitten or infected by the virus, or inhale the fungus spores, and the hive mind of the fungus grows stronger, larger, and takes over the country. The few pockets of humanity that remain live harsh, dangerous existences, sometimes overseen by a fascist militia called FEDRA, the Federal Disaster Response Agency, which seized control of the government after the outbreak and instituted martial law. FEDRA are in constant war with various paramilitary groups, the most notable of which is the Fireflies, a revolutionary militia trying to restore government to the US and find a vaccine for the cordyceps virus. In the midst of all this, we follow a man named Joel, who works as a kind of gun-for-hire and smuggler after losing his only daughter in the initial outbreak. This loss and his need to adapt to survive in the post-apocalypse have turned Joel into a ruthless cynic, bound not by moral principles but by self-preservation. The opening sections of the game suggest he was a very different person before all of this kicked off. Joel is one of the two main protagonists and playable characters in the game. The other is Ellie, a teenage girl born after the outbreak, who has only ever known the bleak reality of a world overrun by the virus. As told in the game's DLC, a prequel story called Left Behind, Ellie grew up an orphan in the Boston quarantine zone, run by FEDRA, and lived in a boarding school which trained her for being in the military, again run by FEDRA. Ellie doesn't fit in very well in this place, is resistant to FEDRA's authority over her, and is intensely curious about the outside world and the pre-pandemic world. She consumes every piece of culture, every comic book, piece of music, or whatever of the old world she can get her hands on. In an incident involving a friend of hers called Riley, who ran away from the boarding school and became a firefly, Ellie is bitten by one of the infected, but discovers she is immune to the virus. Days go by, she shows no symptoms and doesn't turn. Ellie soon finds herself in the care of a struggling group of fireflies led by a woman called Marlene, who sees clearly that Ellie would be key to discovering a vaccine. Marlene enlists Joel the smuggler to transport Ellie across the country to another group of fireflies who are working to create a vaccine, and so the main part of The Last of Us begins. So much happens to Joel and Ellie after that. They meet so many people of different kinds, and they go through so much pain. So much violence, terror, trauma, but also moments of beauty and wonder. Ellie constantly fascinated by the world around her, learning about the America of old, finally discovering the outside world she'd so long dreamed of seeing. Driven by the fact that her life will have a meaning, that she will be key to the survival of the human race. Joel, meanwhile, sees this brutal world anew, through the eyes of an inquisitive child, and this process softens him. He comes to care for Ellie deeply, clearly enjoys showing her around, explaining things to her about the old world, teaching her things. The father in him returns to the surface after being buried under a cold exterior for so many years, and he becomes keen to give her as much of the childhood she deserves as he possibly can. He promises to teach her how to play the guitar. The two of them find comfort, warmth, friendship, and strength in one another. It's one of the most moving depictions of a human connection I've ever seen, in a video game or anywhere else. When Joel and Ellie reach the end of their journey, Joel collapses in exhaustion and pain, waking up later in a Firefly hospital, Ellie nowhere to be seen. He learns that Ellie is already on the operating table, and that in order to create the vaccine, the Fireflies will have to remove her brain, killing her in the process. The Fireflies could create a cure for the virus, a vaccine which could save millions if not billions of lives, and potentially restore human civilization in the process. But to do it, they have to murder a teenage girl. Is it ethical to kill one person if you know it will save many others? This essentially is a version of a thought experiment that philosophers often call the trolley problem. And there has been a lot of research written on this in ethics, psychology, and so on. The research literature on it is usually said to have begun in a 1967 paper by Philippa Foot, but was first called the trolley problem in a 1976 paper by Judith Jarvis Thomson. There are many versions of the trolley problem, but they all kind of revolve around the same idea. The idea is that you have to imagine a tram, a train, or a trolley running out of control down a track towards a junction, where it splits off in two directions. If the train keeps speeding down the track in the direction it's headed, it will run over and kill 5 people who are tied to the track down the road. But if its direction were to be changed and it were to speed down the other track, it would only kill 1 person who is tied to that track. So whatever happens, the trolley is going to kill either 1 or 5 people. You are in the control box for the trolley, standing in front of a lever which can change the direction of the trolley. If you leave the lever alone, the trolley will keep going and run over 5 people. But you can pull the lever and change the direction of the trolley so it will carry on running and kill only 1 person. The question is, what's the right thing to do? Should you pull the lever or not? Intuition and basic arithmetic here might tell you that the morally correct thing to do would be pull the lever. 1 dead person is better than 5 dead people. It's worth sacrificing 1 life if doing so will save multiple others. And this would be even more true if there were more people on the other track. Let's say 50 people would have died if you hadn't pulled it, or 100, or 1,000. Clearly, the right thing to do is to pull the lever. Most people, when surveyed, agree. I think there was a survey done where something like 90% of people said they'd pull the lever. But not everyone thinks it's the right thing to do. And the answer to this question might vary depending on your philosophical position. If you're a utilitarian, you might be more likely to pull the lever because utilitarianism is a version of consequentialism, which argues that the most important factor when evaluating moral dilemmas is the consequences. If you want to know what the right thing to do is, look at the consequences of all the different options you have. The one with the best consequences will be the right thing to do. Utilitarianism operates from the fundamental principle that the best consequences would be the greatest possible good for the greatest possible number of people. So in the simplest version of the trolley problem, the best consequences would be if 5 people survive over 1, so you pull the lever. But there are different ways of thinking about the consequences of moral actions, and different versions of utilitarianism. This version is act utilitarianism, where the focus is on particular acts. An action is right if it produces the best possible results, the greatest possible good for the greatest possible number of people. So act utilitarianism would look at the trolley problem and conclude that the outcome with the best consequences would be if everyone performed the same action in this scenario, i.e. pulling the lever and killing 1 person rather than letting 5 die. But what if you're a rule utilitarian? This is still a version of consequentialism, but with an important difference, that it focuses on the rules which lead to the greatest possible good, not the acts that lead to the greatest possible good. For rule utilitarians, an act is moral if it follows a rule which, if everybody followed it, would lead to the overall greatest good. What if one of those rules was don't do anything which would result in the death of another person? If everyone followed this all the time, would it not lead to the best possible consequences for society? You'd have a society where nobody deliberately killed anybody else. But does that mean I should pull the lever or not? If I pull it, I'm killing someone. If I don't pull it, I'm killing more people. If I pull it, I'm violating the rule that I shouldn't do things which result in the deaths of other people. But if I don't pull it, I'm violating it even more. So what should I do? Well, if you're a type of deontologist, from the Greek word for duty, you'd argue that certain actions are right and wrong in and of themselves, regardless of their consequences. Killing someone, possibly, is wrong in and of itself. It doesn't matter the reason you're doing it for. You shouldn't kill people. So maybe you shouldn't pull the lever, because then you'd be actively participating in the death of another person. If you don't pull it, are you still participating in the death of people? Is doing nothing an action? Can doing nothing, rather than actively acting, be morally condemned here? What if you're a virtue ethicist and believe we should look to the moral example of others when judging moral actions, at moral character rather than principles or consequences? The right thing to do would be the thing a virtuous person would do. So we look to the idea of virtue and virtuous behaviour as a guide in what we do. A bit of a what would Jesus do kind of logic. Christians believe that Jesus was a perfectly virtuous person, and that everything he did and said was therefore virtuous, that he was morally infallible. So in any situation, if you do what Jesus would have done, you would be doing the right thing, basically by definition. Would Jesus have pulled the lever? Well, no. He'd probably have clicked his fingers and had everybody magically untied from the tracks, so everyone survived. But assuming for the sake of argument that he couldn't do that, giving an answer to this question is still not easy. He's generally to have been taken as a pacifist of some kind, a critic of violence and an advocate for peace. This despite the fact that he said, "I came not to bring peace but a sword." He also advised people to follow God's 10 commandments, which included, "Thou shalt not kill," or "Thou shalt do no murder." So we're kind of back to the deontology point again. Is it right to actively participate in the death of another person? Is not pulling the lever active participation? We could go on and on with this, but if it wasn't clear to you by now, I'm not the biggest fan of trolley problems. I don't find them to be particularly helpful or productive, or serious way to think about moral dilemmas. They're completely artificial scenarios, totally removed from reality and actual moral dilemmas. Real moral dilemmas are never this simple. Trolley problems are set up so as to almost be mathematical problems. 5 is more than 1, so it's the right thing to do. They're set up so you just look bad if you don't pull the lever, and most people agree that it's the right thing to do. But so what? These situations rarely have anything to do with reality, and trolley problems remove a bunch of morally relevant information and treat it like it's unimportant. Who are the people involved, for a start? What if it's 5 serial killers and 1 charity worker? Would that make a difference? Why? There are philosophers that have changed the trolley problem to use it to think about these questions, but there's something to me that just feels off about this whole thought experiment. It makes morality into a numbers game, an abstract consideration with no connection to actual moral situations, with actual moral dilemmas. And it's all well and good to pontificate about moral principles and say, oh yes, I'd definitely pull the lever, it's definitely the right thing to do. But what if the one person on that track was your mother, or your father, or your partner, or your child? We might all say we'd pull the lever, but I think many of us would be revealed to be hypocrites very quickly. What of our morality then? So honestly, I don't think we learn that much from trolley problems, and I think The Last of Us, at least in part, agrees with me. And the harrowing conclusion to the story rejects the moral coldness and dispassionateness that so often goes along with responses to trolley problems. And it instead affirms the messy, complex nature of human morality, which can so rarely be reduced to simplistic decisions like the ones involved in the trolley problem. So what happens when Joel finds out that the fireflies could make a vaccine but would kill Ellie in the process? He saves Ellie's life, killing dozens of fireflies in the process, and potentially dooming humanity to a wretched existence in perpetuity. He does this against Ellie's will, because she was willing to give her life for a greater cause, and he lies to her about it when she regains consciousness later, saying there's actually loads of people like her, and they'd visited the fireflies, and the fireflies couldn't do anything. It's fair to say that what Joel did was wrong. It's totally fair to criticise it from a moral perspective. But he did it because he couldn't bear to see this young girl that he had come to love die. It wasn't right that this be expected of her, that she be robbed of her childhood and her life, however awful these may have ended up being in a world like that. Now, of course, that logic also applies to the people he killed to save her. They certainly didn't deserve to die either, especially when you consider that they were trying to save humanity, even at the cost of the life of a teenager. Joel's actions were bad, but he did them perhaps for a good reason. And do we want a society which is built upon the deliberate killing of children? But we could also say that what Joel did was ultimately a selfish action, even though he did it to save a young girl's life. He did it because he couldn't bear to lose another daughter, even though she was actually okay with giving her life for humanity. But it's like with the trolley problem. These pronouncements about what's right and wrong are all well and good, but how do you know you wouldn't have done the same thing if it was your daughter on that operating table? If a father wouldn't at least want to do what Joel did in that situation, what should we say about the state of their soul, their worth as a father, or their relationship with their daughter? These are not easy questions. Ultimately, the conclusion of The Last of Us affirms how messy human morality actually is, and the hypocrisy in trying to reduce it to simple binary choices like the trolley problem. People can do bad things for good reasons. People can do good things for bad reasons. Immoral actions can be understandable, and it's often impossible to divorce emotion and human connection from our ethical considerations. Morality is not just a numbers game, and we should not so easily rationalise the death of other people. There's something of the soul of humanity and morality in the character of Joel, despite how wrong his actions ended up being, and the consequences of those actions. He was driven by the love of another, and the injustice that the young girl should have her life snatched from her through no fault of her own, and his desire to continue to have a beautiful human connection in a harsh, unforgiving world. Would these be bad reasons for doing anything? So thank you so much for watching. This has been Breaking the Game. Do like and subscribe if you'd like to see any more content like this. Do leave us a comment and let us know what you think about what we've been talking about. And we'll see you next time.